Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. As a person of faith, I have always loved the saying, some things have to be believed to be seen. I think St. Paul would agree, and in fact, he seems to mention something like that in the 8th chapter of Romans when he says, "But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience." You might say that as Christians, we hope for a great many things we don't see. We hope for heaven. We hope for the return of Jesus. We hope for a future of blessing and goodness and many other things, all of which we can't, for right now, actually see with our eyes. But we can see them with our hearts. And we have been given a promise of them that we believe and trust. And so we see. But Paul also lays his finger on the pulse of the problem. It's not always easy to be patient as we wait for these promises to be fulfilled. That's why we call it faith. Today is our last day of considering mothers in the Bible, and these weeks after Mother's Day, we have seen good mothers and bad mothers, and the truth is, for our mothers, let's try that all again. Today is our last day of considering mothers in the Bible in these weeks after Mother's Day. We have seen good mothers and bad mothers, and the truth is, for our mother we will focus on today, we don't really know much about how she mothered. Today we want to talk about Elizabeth and her husband, Zechariah. I'm glad to have this opportunity to talk about Zechariah and Elizabeth because I think the story of God working through them often gets overshadowed by the story of Joseph and Mary. If we talk about Zechariah and Elizabeth at all, it is most likely to talk about Mary's visit to Elizabeth and how the baby in Elizabeth's womb leapt at the sound of Mary's voice. We know that Elizabeth's baby will be Jesus' cousin and will become known as John the Baptist, who pointed the way to Jesus. Amazingly, even in the womb. But most of us may not be as familiar with the whole story. Zechariah was a priest, and it was the turn of his group of priests to serve at the temple. Each day they would cast lots to see which one was chosen to go into the temple and offer incense. And on this one day, Zechariah was chosen. While he was inside, an assembly of people were worshiping outside. But inside, while Zechariah was alone in the temple, an angel appeared to him. Zechariah was terrified, but the angel told him not to be afraid, that God had heard his prayer for a child, and that Elizabeth would bear a son, and they were to name him John. Furthermore, as he grew, he was never to drink wine or strong drink. Then the angel went on to describe how the Holy Spirit would lead this baby to grow up and turn the hearts of many in Israel back to God. Well, this was all a bit much to take in. Zechariah and Elizabeth were getting on in years, and so Zechariah asked, "How will I know that this is so?" The angel replied, "I am Gabriel, and I stand in the presence of God, and have been sent to tell you all this. But since you have not believed, you will become mute until all this occurs." When Zechariah came out of the temple, he could not speak, and the people realized he had seen a vision. And when his time of service ended, he went home. Sure enough, Elizabeth conceived, and eventually the time came for the baby to be born. When they took him to the temple on the 8th day to circumcise him, it was also time to give him a name. Since Zechariah couldn't speak, Elizabeth said, "His name is John." The people were confused and said, "But none of your relatives has this name." And they asked Zechariah about it. He motioned for something to write on, and when they brought it, he wrote, "His name is John." Suddenly his mouth was opened, and he sang a song of praise to God about this child. Part of it pointed to what John would do and proclaimed, "And you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give knowledge of salvation to his people by the forgiveness of their sins. By the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace." What we know of Elizabeth is that she was old, and like so many other mothers in the Bible, she longed and yearned to have a child. One might suspect that when John was born, she was a doting mother, so happy at long last to have a child. She was certainly a mother who imparted faith in her son. He became a person of profound faith, baptizing people and pointing to Jesus. Finally, I want to point out one more mother we can't ignore, and that would be Mary. Again, we don't know much about how she mothered and how knowing who Jesus was might have changed her mothering. What we do know is that she remained devoted to Jesus throughout his earthly life. She remained a faithful disciple until her own death. And perhaps her love was shown in how she pondered things about Jesus in her heart. She was focused on celebrating her child where it most belongs, in her heart. It's a mother's love, which is and should be a lot like God's love. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.